It's the youngest man since Magic Johnson to make an All-Star team. Kevin Garnett.
He's 20 and he's going on 21.
I remember that All-Star game. That was back in 1997. That was Kevin Garnett's first All-Star game. As I said, he was the youngest man to be in an All-Star game since Magic Johnson. And I remember that All-Star game because the same one with Glenn Rice set the record for most points in a quarter with 20. I believe he did in the third quarter. And Michael Jordan recorded the first triple-double in All-Star game history, which was later matched and some say exceeded by LeBron James, saying he had a stronger triple-double, though I like to counter that argument with the fact that in today's NBA, starters play, on average, far more minutes in the All-Star games than they did back then, where it was more of an even distribution of minutes toward all the starters. Though the starters did play a few more minutes, you tend to see the bench guys much more back then. But I digress from the point of this video. It's about Kevin Garnett in particular, the fact that he made it official. He announced his retirement from the NBA after 21 magnanimous seasons, 21 seasons, which ties the record for most seasons played by an NBA player, with Kevin Willis and the Chief Robert Parrish. And if you talk professional ranks, also with Moses Malone. Moses Malone came into the professional ranks with the ABA with the Utah Stars in 1974, and last played professionally in 1994-95 seasons as a reserve, a very seldom used reserve with the San Antonio Spurs in 94-95 season. I think when you think of Kevin Garnett, I think you can make the argument that there was no player who has had a bigger impact with one franchise and dominated one particular franchise more than the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, when I say dominated, I'm not saying he was the best player of all time, but I'm not saying that, but name recognition toward one franchise. Like, even with Michael, there are other players you think of when you think of Chicago Bulls. Even though I think Michael the greatest player of all time, you still have other guys like that come to mind, like Scottie Pippen and Bob Love and Chet Walker and Norm Van Leer and Horace Grant. You get what I'm saying? There's still other players in their history that come up. Jerry Sloan, Artis Gilmore. With the Minnesota Timberwolves, you tend to only think about Kevin Garnett. Maybe you think about Sam Mitchell. But generally speaking, when it comes to younger fans, when you say the name Minnesota Timberwolves, the team, you think of Kevin Garnett. I mean, because before Kevin Garnett arrival, who was there? Tony Campbell, a guy who many people don't even remember. You had Chuck Person that played for them for a while. You had, I believe, Michael Williams, Christian Laettner, who didn't really pan out, particularly what you thought he would be in the NBA, and Isaiah Ryder. But it wasn't until 1995 when they drafted Kevin Garnett and hired Flip Saunders as a coach. I got to mention that, the late Flip Saunders, that the franchise was forever altered, and altered for the better. While they did not achieve team success the first couple of years, you could recognize that Kevin Garnett, while he was raw, he was a talent and a force that would be reckoned with once he got everything together. Listed as 6'11", though it's pretty much well known that he was at least 7'1", or at least 7.5 feet. He was rare, you know. And those days, it was very rare for a player to go prep to pro. And then you saw for a while it was happening a little bit more frequently until they changed the rule where you had to have at least 1 year of college. and now I think it's 2 years of college or whatever. But it was very rare in those days for players to go from prep to pro, and Garnett was raw. He did not win Rookie of the Year his first year in the NBA. I believe that was achieved by Damon Stoudemire of the Toronto Raptors. But you could see with Kevin Garnett, well, he was raw. You could see the talent there. And it was his second year when he really emerged as a force. And it looked for a while that team was going to be one of the better teams in the Western Conference. With Garnett, you saw, as far as his personality type, he was very expressive. He was very competitive. He played with his heart out every night. And he played with an intensity and a ferociousness that you had to look at other superstars with as far as with that, like Michael Jordan comes to mind, perhaps Shaquille O'Neal to an extent, Kobe Bryant. Those are the type of players with that competitiveness and that fierceness and intensity. But he also was unique in the fact that he was pretty much like a two guard in the body of a four. Really lanky and skinny when he first came in, about 220, 215, 220 pounds. He eventually filled out to about 240, 245 pounds. But it looked for a while that team was going to be surging. And I remember when Team Cancer, Stephen Marbury came in, it looked like they were going to be a duo that would bring that team to the future. Matter of fact, I believe they went to the playoffs. What was it? First round. What was it? 90. I'm going off memory here. What was it? 98 when they went to the postseason. Or it may have been 97. But ultimately, Team Cancer Marbury wanted a bigger role with the franchise and more money, and ultimately he departed. And Kevin Garnett, while he was a dominant player, he still needed more help. He did not have the teammates that other players were taking for granted, really. He did not have the supporting cast. But he still was individually a very brilliant player. And from an individualistic standpoint, he reached his zenith in 2003, 2004, when he won the MVP award, leading NBA in rebounding, by the way, and I believe block shots that season. But as Kevin Garnett aged, the team that had coalesced around him during that time, many of those guys were older veterans, but many of them departed, retired, left, and the team grew terrible again. And Garnett voiced his concerns that he was tired of losing. And then you have the 2007 offseason, which brought, through circumstances and events, the big three to the Boston Celtics. You hear that term now quite frequently, the big three, but nowadays, but back then you can't say that it was manufactured. There was no surreptitious meeting of minds between a group of trio of NBA players wanting to connect with one team. This was a fortunate series of events that occurred that was very fortunate for one particular franchise. The Boston Celtics have been mired in tragedy and mediocrity, if not just downright awfulness, for 20 years. After the Sweet 16th NBA championship in '86 season, their draftee, Len Bias, who probably would have had at the very least a top 50 all-time NBA caliber career, died of a drug overdose. Then you had Red Auerbach, who probably was just a little bit too loyal to his big three. probably should have made some business decisions that would have been harsh and unpopular, but in the long run, it would have been popular. It would have been, the better thing for the Boston Celtics franchise. But he chose to remain loyal and had players that played far too long in certain roles and ultimately grew older and lost their effectiveness. Larry Bird ended up retiring. Then Kevin McHale. Then Robert Parrish was traded. Then the Celtics became a very mediocre team. I remember the Todd Day, Rick Fox days. I remember those days when they were not a very good team. And Walter McCarty, that's the name I was trying to think of in my head. Those days, excuse me. And in the 2000s, while they had Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker for a while, they were still never able quite to get over the hump playing against other teams in the Eastern Conference like the 76ers and the Pacers and the New Jersey Nets. But then Kevin Garnett comes over in a trade to join Paul Pierce. And then the fortunate signing of Ray Allen bought the Big Three. And that one glorious season, they went on to win 66 games. Kevin Garnett, through I think through a little help from teammates, although I'm not going to say he didn't deserve the victory, the award, but I think he had better seasons. Won the Defensive Player of the Year award in 2007, 2008, and they went on to vanquish the Los Angeles Lakers in the finals, 4-2. I'll never forget that last game when they just thumped the Lakers. It was probably, for me, because I hate the Lakers, particularly at that time, it was the most satisfying win I ever saw for a team outside of my Chicago Bulls in the finals. I even remember the score. I think it was 131-92, if I'm not mistaken. It was a thrashing. And Kevin Garnett got that one goal, that one thing that had been eluding him. And like he said, after that, he knew that anything was possible. The next season was still a very good campaign for the Boston Celtics and Kevin Garnett. I remember there was the injury to Kevin Garnett just before the playoffs, a little bit before the playoffs, which kept that team from repeating. But I really think that team would have repeated at the very least as NBA champions. And ultimately, the Boston Celtics were a very formidable team. For a while, they were the dominant franchise in the Eastern Conference. And there were some people that said that, winning went to Kevin Garnett's head, that he became very vocal and arrogant. He had been the same guy. It's just that he knew his value with the Timberwolves. He just never had a supporting cast around him. But finally having a supporting cast around him, he was a vocal guy. He wasn't out there to make friends with anybody. He wasn't out there, and I admire that. It was an old school mentality. He wasn't out there to make friends and to shake hands. He was out there to play and to beat you. And might I add this too, while I'm thinking about it. Today, LeBron James is revered, as a top 5 all-time player. Most people are at least top 10. And there's some people think he can vie one day for Michael Jordan's for all-time NBA supremacy. But let's not forget that for a while, the Boston Celtics were LeBron James' kryptonite. The Boston Celtics with Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett, and Rajon Rondo, my ad, used to kick LeBron James' ass during the regular season and in the postseason. If you want to say that the Detroit Pistons used to beat up on Michael Jordan, the Boston Celtics used to beat up on LeBron James. Let's not forget that it was the Boston Celtics that drove LeBron James out of Cleveland the first time, ultimately, when he threw his jersey off after the world's most insignificant triple-double in 2010 in the postseason. But back to Kevin Garnett. Ultimately, as with every great player, you age. and he got older. But he still remained a very effective player. And it was always a joy to watch him play. And a few years later, he was traded to the Brooklyn Nets. And he remained a very valuable force, even if he was just in a supporting role. And just last year, he rejoined the Minnesota Timberwolves behind some advice and some suggestions from Flip Saunders, a little bit battling cancer, to come back with the franchise and be a mentor to the younger players. And perhaps, if not that season, the very next season, go for a postseason run. But Flip Saunders unexpectedly got sicker, gravely ill, and he passed away. I believe it was just before the start of the NBA season. And Kevin Garnett felt a little bit shut out by some of the decisions by management and ownership as far as his role post-playing days. And ultimately, I guess the thrill of playing left Kevin Garnett. So today, Kevin Garnett has come full circle. Well, close to full circle. I think he'll come full circle when he's in the Hall of Fame. But his career has now come to a close. And he now joins an illustrious group of players who all have decided to call it quits. Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett. It will be a glorious cast and group of players who will be enshrined in the 2021 Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame induction. And may I say toward all of us that Kevin Garnett, you were an ultimate competitor. You brought intensity to the game that very few have matched. And I will say that we'll always remember you as we do in this picture, young, carefree, and giving it all you got.